Give a child a stick, a patch of dirt, and another child, and the stick stops being a stick. It becomes a spear, an animal, a boundary, a prize. You did this before anyone taught you how. Your toys became smaller versions of the adult world. Your games turned fear into rules you could survive. Your friends became teammates, rivals, judges, and co-conspirators. And every ridiculous game quietly trained something real. That instinct is ancient. So if you had been born thousands of years ago, with no playground, no screen, and almost nothing made just for children, would you have had less fun? Or would the part of your brain that invents games have simply turned the whole world into one? Picture a child at the edge of a late Ice Age camp. Not a named child, not a biography, just the kind of young person archaeology usually loses. The adults are doing serious things. Stone is being struck into cutting edges. Food is being prepared. Wood and hide are being worked. Every useful object takes time, and mistakes can hurt. The child watches. Then the child reaches for a piece of discarded stone. But here's the problem. Prehistoric childhood is almost invisible if you only search for objects stamped with the word toy. Wood rots, fiber disappears. A stick used as a horse, sword, doll, or digging tool leaves almost no archaeological signature. Even clay figures and miniature tools can be difficult to classify. A small object might be a toy. It might be ritual. It might be a practical tool made for a small hand. The categories that feel obvious to you were not written on the object. That uncertainty is why one old assumption became so powerful. Ancient children were mostly background characters in an adult story. In 1989, Norwegian archaeologist Grete Lillehammer challenged archaeology to treat children as people worth looking for. Since then, researchers have learned to notice strange clues: unusually small handprints, tiny footprints, badly made stone tools, miniature objects, clusters of activity that do not quite match adult work. And that's where it gets interesting. At Étioles in France, a Magdalenian camp used around the end of the last ice age preserves extraordinary evidence of flint-knapping. Some knappers were highly skilled, others were clearly learning. Archaeologist Michel Langley has argued that particular small activity areas, including places called G13 and J18, deserve to be considered as possible child-made or child-used spaces. One is especially rich in apprentice-knapped stone. Look at what that means physically. A child does not need a carved wooden horse to play. A pile of rejected stone is enough. The child can copy the adult strike, fail, turn the piece, try again, compare results, show another child, and turn serious technology into an absorbing challenge. The first game may have been imitation, but imitation has a flaw. Copying adults is hard when the adult tool is sized for an adult body. A stone core is heavy. A spear is long. A complicated movement demands strength and control a small hand does not yet have. So the child changes the problem. Small objects matter here. Archaeologists working on childhood have repeatedly noted scaled-down tools and weapons in prehistoric contexts. Some may have functioned as real child-sized equipment. Others are so small or so limited that play becomes a plausible interpretation. The boundary is messy, but the pattern makes sense. When the adult world is too large, children shrink it. You probably did the same thing. A toy kitchen works because the real kitchen matters. A toy truck works because the real machine matters. Ancient play could turn dangerous adult skills into low-cost experiments. Here's what nobody tells you that makes fun sound less trivial than it is. A child throwing a small spear is not necessarily practicing because an adult assigned a lesson. The fun may be what keeps the practice going. Missing the target is frustrating. Hitting it feels good. Competing with another child creates a reason to repeat the motion. The game manufactures rehearsal without needing a classroom. Then another problem appears. Tools can teach hands, but childhood is not only about tools. A child also has to learn where to go, who to trust, when to cooperate, when to compete, and how to read other people. That requires other children. A 2021 archaeological review of hunter-gatherer childhood surveyed 86 publications across all inhabited continents. It found evidence connected not only to tools and learning, but also to playthings, art, marks, footprints, autonomous exploration, peer learning, and teaching. Ancient children were not merely being filled with adult knowledge. They were active inside their own social worlds. Now follow the footprints. At a Holocene site near Walvis Bay in Namibia, researchers documented a surface dominated by exceptionally well-preserved children's footprints. Footprints cannot tell you a joke, name a game, or prove that every quick turn was play, but they can put small bodies back into a landscape. Children moved, they clustered, they occupied space, and children create meaning from space. Michelle Langley's 2020 work on Pleistocene secret spaces asks a strange question. Could some small, tucked-away prehistoric activity areas have functioned like the forts, cubbies, dens, and hideouts children build now? At Etiole, some features are small, somewhat separate, and associated with apprentice napping. The interpretation is a hypothesis, not a settled label, but the possibility is important, because the moment children have their own patch of ground, imitation can turn into invention. A discarded hide becomes a wall, a hollow becomes a base, a few stones become a boundary. One child says the inside counts, another child decides the entrance. A rule appears where no adult rule existed. But here's the thing. Rules create conflict. Someone cheats, someone changes the boundary, someone refuses to share the best object, someone gets excluded. Fun suddenly becomes social stress in miniature, and that may be part of the point. Play gives children a cheap version of expensive adult problems. Who leads? Who follows? What counts as fair? What happens when a partner breaks the rule? The stakes are small enough to survive, but real enough to matter. Then the world gets stranger. Deep inside Rouffignac Cave in France, fingers were dragged through soft clay on walls and ceilings, leaving lines called finger flutings. In a 2006 Antiquity study, Kevin Sharp and Leslie Van Gelder compared the dimensions of those marks with experimental flutings. They concluded that some marks on the roof of chamber A1 were made by children roughly 2 to 5 years old. Those children could not simply have reached the roof. Adults likely had to lift them, and this is where it gets remarkable. An adult carries a very young child into a dark, decorated cave, raises the child towards soft clay, and the child's fingers move across the surface. Calling that a game would go beyond the evidence. It could involve teaching, ritual, art, exploration, or several things at once, but it proves something more basic and more useful. Children were not sealed away from meaningful spaces. Small hands were participating. The adult world was not just something ancient children watched, it was material they could touch. And once children can touch the adult world, they can copy it, shrink it, bend it, and sometimes turn it into play. Now move that child forward into your world. The patch of dirt becomes a bedroom. The discarded stone becomes a manufactured toy. The open camp becomes a scheduled day. At first, this looks like an upgrade. Safer objects, softer surfaces, fewer sharp flakes, fewer cliffs, fewer predators. Childhood has gained protections ancient children never had. But here's the problem. Safety can accidentally remove the raw material that makes self-directed play work. Call it the practice disguise. The practice disguise is what happens when a child repeats a difficult skill because the skill is hidden inside something that feels like fun. Throwing becomes a contest. Balance becomes climbing. Negotiation becomes a made-up game. Tool use becomes imitation. Social strategy becomes a fort with rules. The child is practicing, but the child experiences play. This idea appears in modern hunter-gatherer research too. A 2025 study of Tsimane children examined object play and argued that play with culturally relevant objects can help children acquire tool use skills and prepare for adult divisions of labor. Modern groups are not fossils of prehistoric life, so that study cannot simply be pasted backward onto the Paleolithic, but it shows the mechanism in a living human context. Children turn important adult activities into play long before they can perform them like adults. And here's the uncomfortable part. Modern childhood can break the practice disguise by separating practice from play. Skills become lessons, movement becomes exercise, social time becomes an appointment, objects arrive with a correct use already printed into them. Even entertainment can arrive pre-written. Level, objective, reward, next level. None of those things is automatically bad. A well-designed game can demand remarkable attention, coordination, memory, and cooperation. Organized activities can teach real skills. The problem appears when too much of childhood is already authored by someone else, because self-directed play needs a gap. You need an object that does not explain itself. You need time that is not already assigned. You need another person who can disagree. You need enough freedom for the rules to become negotiable. So the question becomes, what did ancient children have that is oddly scarce in a world full of toys? Unfinished things. A stick does not tell you what it is. A dirt slope does not tell you how to climb it. A collection of pebbles has no official game mode. A hideout has no instruction manual. The child supplies the story. The material record gets clearer once you move into later ancient societies. A limestone game ball from early dynastic Egypt is dated to roughly 2960 to 2649 BCE. Classical Greek workshops made articulated terracotta dolls with separate moving limbs. One British museum example from about 350 BCE is a dancing doll more than 20 centimeters tall. Roman children's monuments even show games with nuts. None of this means every ancient child owned manufactured toys, or that every object called a doll was really a toy. Museums warn that some figures once labeled dolls were ritual objects instead. That ambiguity matters, but the surviving objects show a continuum. At one end, almost anything in the environment can become play material. At the other, adults begin making specialized objects for games and childhood. The toy changes. The underlying behavior does not. A child still has to animate the object, invent a situation, and bring another mind into the rules. That sounds primitive until you notice how cognitively expensive it is. You have to imagine a role, hold the role in mind, convince someone else, negotiate a rule. Notice when the rule stops working. Change it without destroying the game. Remember who owes what. Control your body enough to keep participating. Recover after losing. Fun is doing a lot of invisible work, which brings us to a second mismatch. Ancient play was probably embedded in mixed-age life far more often than a modern school schedule allows. Archaeological evidence cannot reconstruct the exact daily calendar of a Paleolithic camp, and hunter-gatherer societies vary enormously. But the archaeology of childhood repeatedly points toward learning with peers, autonomous exploration, and participation around adult activities rather than a single institution separating children by exact birth year. Mixed ages create an awkward advantage, unequal skill. The younger child cannot throw as far. The older child knows the route. One child has seen the adults do it. Another child invents a shortcut. Games have to flex or collapse. That forces teaching sideways. A child explains to another child, not because a curriculum requires it, but because the game cannot continue otherwise. At Reframe, the very young marks beside a broader decorated cave environment remind you that participation could begin astonishingly early. At Etiol's, apprentice napping sits beside expert work. Across the 2021 review, learning appears through peers, teaching, and exploration rather than one universal model. Here is the part people forget. Children do not only absorb culture, they modify it. One Cambridge review on hunter-gatherer learning even discusses an experimental case in which a child, struggling to imitate adult stone reduction, placed the stone on a hard surface and struck it differently, producing a solution related to bipolar napping. That experiment does not prove a prehistoric invention was made by a child. It demonstrates the larger point. A smaller body can create a different problem, and a different problem can invite a new solution. That is the practice disguise paying off in an unexpected way. Play begins as imitation. Imitation fails. Failure forces adaptation. Adaptation creates invention, which brings us to modern adults are very good at preventing the failure. The toy is optimized. The area is padded. The rules are settled. The solution is demonstrated. The schedule ends before boredom has time to turn into an idea. Again, protection matters. Ancient childhood also contained injury, disease, hunger, and risks no child needs for healthy development. Romanticizing that world would be absurd. The mismatch is not ancient danger was better. The mismatch is that removing danger is useful, while removing uncertainty is not always useful. A child needs some problems that are real enough to solve and safe enough to fail. Ancient children did not have enrichment activities. They had a world that was unfinished from a child's point of view, and the brain you inherited may still expect some of that unfinished space. The cost appears in a very ordinary moment. A child says, "I'm bored." The adult reaches for a solution, a show, a toy, a class, a device, a planned activity, something to make the uncomfortable empty space disappear. But boredom is sometimes the doorway the practice disguise needs. Not always. Boredom can be miserable, especially when a child lacks safety, company, access, or support. But when every empty minute is instantly filled, one particular sequence gets interrupted. Nothing is happening, so the child has to make something happen. And that's where it gets interesting. Ancient children almost certainly complained, resisted, fought, sulked, and demanded attention too. Archaeology cannot recover those sentences. The point is not that prehistoric children floated through perfect creative freedom. The point is material. They lived among more open-ended objects: stone, bone, mud, water, sticks, cordage, scraps, footprints, walls, animals, tools, other children. Those things can be work, danger, learning, or play depending on the moment. A modern object often arrives with a narrower identity. This is the toy, this is the lesson, this is the screen, this is the sports equipment, this is the craft kit. The categories are cleaner. Cleaner categories can make childhood easier to manage. But here's the thing. Children learn category breaking through use. The same pebble becomes food in one game, money in another, ammunition in a third, and a boundary marker 5 minutes later. That flexibility is not impressive because the pebble is special. It is impressive because the child is doing the transformation. Now return to those possible child spaces at Etiole. If the secret space interpretation is right, the important feature is not that Ice Age children invented the first clubhouse. That claim would be far too strong. The important feature is that archaeology may preserve a place where learners were doing things somewhat apart from the main flow of expert adult activity. A small zone can change behavior. Away from the expert, mistakes become less embarrassing. Rules can drift. Experiments can last longer. Peer culture can appear. Here's what nobody tells you. Children sometimes need a world that adults have not finished organizing. That creates another modern domino. More supervision reduces some risks, but more supervision can reduce independent problem solving. So adults add structured opportunities for problem solving, but structured problems arrive with known goals. So children get better at solving presented problems while receiving fewer chances to decide what the problem is. That last step matters. A game invented by children begins with a question adults often skip. What are you even trying to do? Cross the ditch without touching the ground. Hit the tree from behind the line. Build a wall high enough that nobody outside can see in. Get 3 stones into the circle. Pretend this branch is injured and has to be carried home. The objective itself is creative work. And here's the uncomfortable part. If every objective arrives from outside, the child's job changes from world builder to task completer. That does not doom a generation. Human children are aggressively playful. They invent games in hallways, classrooms, back seats, message threads, and digital worlds. Give them constraints, and they will often misuse them beautifully. there is another cost hiding in the social side. When adults solve every disagreement immediately, children lose repetitions of a difficult skill, repairing a game after conflict. A made-up game is fragile. One unfair move can end it. Keeping it alive requires persuasion, compromise, memory, and sometimes accepting a rule you did not choose. Those are not warm-up exercises for social life. They are social life at child scale. That is why peer play can be so messy and so useful at the same time. The ancient system is stubborn, but it can be crowded out. The practice disguise needs repetition without feeling like a drill. It needs negotiation without an adult instantly settling every dispute. It needs physical or social feedback that matters enough to adjust behavior. It needs occasional failure that does not end the opportunity. The prehistoric child missing a target, producing a bad flake, losing a race, or getting excluded from a peer game was not receiving a designed lesson. That is exactly why the lesson could hide inside the experience. Fun made practice self-propelled. When the fun disappears, adults often have to replace it with motivation, rewards, reminders, points, deadlines, praise. Ancient children had rewards too. Laughter, status, attention, belonging, the satisfaction of finally making the thing work. The difference is that the reward could emerge from the activity itself, and when that happens, practice can continue long after instruction would have become exhausting. So the useful lesson is not to recreate an Ice Age childhood, no sharp stone nursery, no unsupervised cliff exploration, no pretending infection builds character. The reframe is simpler. Stop asking whether play is separate from learning. For most of human history, that separation may have made very little sense. A child copies a tool because copying is interesting. A child chases because chasing feels good. A child builds a hidden space because ownership of a tiny world is exciting. A child makes marks because surfaces invite marks. A child creates rules because other children make life complicated. The learning is inside the fun. Here's the part people forget. The best modern version of ancient play is not an educational toy designed to teach a specific skill. It is a safe piece of unfinished world, something that can become more than one thing. A box, a blanket, chalk, dirt, blocks, water, scrap cardboard, a ball with no organized drill attached, a park with enough time for the game to change halfway through. The object matters less than the authorship. There is a practical test for this reframe. Look at a child's activity and ask one question. Who owns the next move? If every next move comes from an adult, a worksheet, a coach, a video, or an app, the child may still be learning, but the experience is mostly instruction. If the child can change the goal, repurpose the object, recruit another player, abandon one rule, invent another, and recover from a failed attempt, authorship shifts back toward the child. That does not require hours of abandonment. It can happen inside boundaries. The area can be safe. The time can be limited. Dangerous tools can stay out of reach. Adults can still be nearby. The useful ingredient is not risk for its own sake. It is genuine choice inside a safe enough world. That distinction protects the best part of ancient play without importing the worst parts of ancient childhood. Hunger is not enrichment. Injury is not character building. Child mortality is not a lesson in resilience. The past is useful here because it exposes a human mechanism, not because the past was kinder. Who decides what happens next? If the child does, the practice disguise can switch back on. The first attempt fails, so the rules change. Another child joins, so the story changes. Someone gets bored, so the objective changes. A structure falls, so the design changes. That is not wasted time around the learning. That is the learning. And this is where the ancient evidence becomes emotionally useful. Those tiny finger lines at Reframe do not give you a transcript. The small activity zones at Etiole do not prove a particular game. The child footprints in Namibia do not identify who was laughing. Archaeology stays frustratingly quiet, but the silence prevents a mistake too. It stops you from turning ancient childhood into a cute montage of dolls, races, and campfire games that cannot actually be proven. What survives is deeper. Children touched the surfaces adults touched. They moved through real landscapes. They practiced technologies. They made marks. They occupied spaces. They handled objects that could be both useful and playful. They were not waiting for civilization to invent childhood. So the practice disguise was never really about toys. It was about a developing human brain turning participation into repetition, repetition into skill, and uncertainty into a reason to keep going. You still carry that system, and sometimes the most useful thing an adult can give it is not another answer, it is room. So go back to the stick in the dirt. At the beginning, it looked like almost nothing, a primitive substitute for a real toy. Now it looks different. The stick is valuable precisely because it is unfinished. It can become the tool, the animal, the boundary, the prize, the mistake, the new rule. The child has to supply what the object refuses to provide. Ancient children probably had fewer things made exclusively for fun than you did, but fun does not require a toy industry. It requires a brain willing to turn the world into a game. And the next time a child picks up a stick and insists that it is obviously not a stick, the strange part is not the imagination. The strange part is how old that move may be. To see what happened when the games ended and darkness arrived, the next Neanderthink story follows what ancient humans did at night.